And I know that people have been struggling a lot um, with that concept. Like, well, well, I don't have to do, insert thing here, right? Because I don't feel sick. I don't feel like I
Hmm.
have a fever. So, it's kind of interesting because we've been changing things up a lot, and people are watching science happen in real time, right, with this disease, and they're watching the guidance change. So, you know, can you talk to me a little bit about how, like, the thought process with, coronavirus restrictions and things has gone? Why does it look like we've gone backwards, and how that's really not true?
Absolutely. And I think it's a great question because I know it can be really confusing when it looks like science changes its mind. We hear a lot in politics about flip flopping, and that flip flopping is generally a bad thing. And in science, that's not really the case because as there is new information, you adapt to new information and you learn from it. And that is generally a good thing. So, at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, when we recommended no masks, it was because our general understanding of viruses is that you don't see asymptomatic cases in a highly lethal virus. And therefore, the original assumption was you don't generally have asymptomatic cases, and therefore masks are not as necessary. We pretty quickly learned that that wasn't true. We did our research, we paid attention, and we found that asymptomatic transmission was somewhere like 20-25%, which is incredibly unusual. And that led to the suggestion of actually masks are highly protective, given what we've now learned. And that's kind of been the trend throughout the pandemic is that as we've learned, but B, as things have changed on the ground and the circumstances have changed, things that were once not true become true. So, for instance, as you're seeing kind of masks come back with this Delta variant, it's mask wearing could be relaxed for a while because our understanding at the time was that if you were vaccinated against the existing strains of coronavirus, you were very well protected and that you were generally safe. With the emergence of Delta variant and a lack of vaccination in certain areas, unfortunately, you've seen the mask become necessary again. So, it does definitely feel like, well, they can't make up their mind. But what it is as we learn more and as things change, it's important to respond to the new reality.
Yeah, and I do want to take a second here just because you mentioned political flip-flopping. So I really just want to hammer home that point that it's really not the same. In politics, we look a lot at, you hold a certain position, you appreciate a certain policy, and you go to your representative body with that in mind, and you fight for that, and you don't, whatever. So flip-flopping is this idea that you have a principle, like a policy principle that you stand for, and then you've betrayed that principle by doing whatever action is that is dubbed the flip-flopping. In science, that's not really what we're talking about. And I think the point you made about new information and constant new streams of information is really useful because I don't think people are seeing that, right? I think people are seeing that, they're seeing these authoritative sources, the CDC, the White House, and things say, okay, well, now we're doing this, or their governor saying, now we're doing this. And that seems like it's a flip-flop. And partially because it's coming from politicians who are inherently untrustworthy on their face, it can look a little bit like that. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about that, like, well, no, we're just kind of watching the science happen, and most of us in our lifetimes haven't experienced that.
So, and actually, I'll give you an example from my own day-to-day research.
Please.
And I will say, because one of the most important things in science is admitting, I don't know, or I thought that was true, and it's not. So for instance, I won't go into the details of my specific research, but, I was looking at one mutation and we thought it was doing A. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue and check if it's doing A. And I did a whole experiment, took me like a week to do, and I get the data back and it goes, it is not doing A. It is doing something, but it is not A. And so we had to kind of go back and reevaluate, okay, it wasn't that. What are the other options? What are the other possibilities? And how do we now restructure thinking? What processes are being impacted here? So it's a very common thing in science to go, I think it's this. And then you test it. And sometimes you're wrong, and that's okay.
Yeah, and again, we just don't have that in politics, right? It's just,
Yeah.
it's not really something that happens. it's sometimes it will, and it's very rare, but it's very difficult, and people are very much triggered is the wrong word, but are kind of primed, to use a scientific term,
Yes.
to think about things as definites.